Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It is brought to you by the Gallery Bar, Book, and Games at Ocean Casino Resort. Go to the Gallery, go to Ocean, go for the win. For more info, visit theoceanac.com. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. All right, Eagles tomorrow night. They are taking on the Cleveland Browns. They played the Browns in joint practices the last 2 days. What is Geoff Mosher's take? If you have a question for Jeff, 609-403-0973. We're going to try to open up the text board more and more for our Football at 4 and our football segments throughout the fall here. One of the ways that you can engage with our guests, text in a question for them at 609-403-0973. I see some questions for Jeff already coming in. So if you have a Football at 4 question for Geoff Mosher, 609-403-0973 as we get you ready for really, I don't know what to make of the second preseason game. We know the starters aren't going to play because they just played all week long in these practice observations. So what do we expect to see tomorrow night in the game against Cleveland? I would imagine that you're not going to see obviously Jalen Hurts. You're not going to see most of the starters on the offensive side of the ball. I would think that you're not going to see a lot of players that are going to be there for the opener. So what are some of the things that we are watching tomorrow night? Geoff Mosher is here. We'll ask him that. If you have questions for Jeff, 609-403-0973. It's another edition of Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast with Geoff Mosher. What's up, Moshe?
How you doing, Mike? What's going on?
I'm ready, man. I'm ready for tomorrow night to see all the backups play. I'm ready to go. We know tomorrow night we're not going to see any starters, I would imagine, right? They played predominantly the last 2 days here, so none of the regulars will be suiting up tomorrow night, I would imagine, correct?
Yeah, I would think so. If you heard Nick Sirianni talk leading up to the joint practices about why he didn't play a lot of guys against the in the preseason opener the other night against the who did they play? I already forgot.
Baltimore.
The Ravens, right? Yeah, the Ravens. And he was saying, like, we have a short turnaround. And the schedule didn't do them any favors. They had basically, 1 day off and then, bam, joint practices. And for them, they view the joint practices probably more, for the starters especially, as more important than the preseason games because you're getting ones versus ones. You're getting a team you haven't seen before. And as you saw or heard about in the practices, they're very, very intense. And so with this short turnaround, after 2 grueling days of practice, it's hard to believe that you're going to see guys like, much like a Jason Kelce or a Lane Johnson go right back out there and play in a preseason game just to get a drive or two in. It's not necessary.
I want to ask you about that. You mentioned Lane Johnson and some of those guys. After watching these joint practices the last couple of days, is the offensive line depth a little bit of a concern? I mean, we saw Juergens, Adam said yesterday that he struggled a little bit. We saw Dickerson out. Suopeta came in, and he struggled a little bit. And this is a team that if I have an issue, Jeff, if you said to me, what's my biggest concern about the team? Can they stay healthy for a second straight season? And if that's not the case, some of the Eagles seasons in my recent memory that have gotten derailed have been when the offensive line got beat up and you had to start replacing guys. So what do you think about the depth of this offensive line now that we've seen them in a game and 2 joint practices?
Yeah, no, there's no doubt, Mike, that there are questions about depth on the offensive line at certain spots, meaning, at right tackle, right guard, Jack Driscoll is a guy who's come in, played adequately, can hold it down if need be, so you're not as concerned there. But with Cam Juergens now starting at right guard to fill Isaac Seumalo's void, they don't really have a backup center until most recently they brought in Josh Andrews. And by the way, that's been less of a question mark because of Josh Andrews, because without Josh Andrews, who's been a veteran, who started off with the Eagles, he's played last year with the Saints, he's been in the league for a while. Without Josh Andrews, they were having Brett Toth as the second team center. And Brett Toth was snapping the ball to Jupiter. So they needed somebody who could come in and stabilize that second team center spot and just basically be able to at least snap the ball to Marcus Mariota. Now, is Josh Andrews going to make the team? I don't know. I think that now he has a pretty decent shot simply for that reason alone. And as you go from center to left, Mike, last year you had Andre Dillard, who remade his body and was more he did not win the left tackle job, but he's a former first-round pick. He has talent, and he was able to step in at both left tackle and left guard when need be. Without Andre Dillard and without, and with Tyler Steen still getting kind of worked into the mix, you see Fred Johnson right now playing second-team left tackle, and Fred Johnson's a guy who, has a little bit of experience. He played some games with the Bengals a couple of years ago. I mean, it's okay, but you don't certainly feel as comfortable as you felt in the past with Andre Dillard. So if you really look at what the Eagles have lost over the last 2 years on the offensive line, they've obviously lost the starting right guard in Samalu. They lost Nate Herbig, who was a pretty good interior backup offensive line. They lost Andre Dillard. All right. They lost Jack Anderson. He wound up getting claimed off waivers by the Giants at the time. So that's where he is with now. They kept Josh Sills. And then in doing so last year, they let go of a guy named Coyote Awosika, who had some interior offensive line acumen. He got claimed. And they really didn't get Josh Sills back, right, until like a week ago. So without really knowing what Josh Sills is, there is some fair question about the depth on the offensive line.
Yeah, that's one area.
Center left.
Yeah, that's one area there. What about running back? What do we discern from what we've seen so far? Does it still look, this is going to be fluid, or do you have a better understanding of, because, I mean, is there a possibility in your mind that like a Rashad Penny doesn't even make the team after what we've seen?
Well, there's no question about depth at running back. That is certainly not an issue. The question is, how do they keep all of them? And the longer this goes, and everybody's healthy right now, so that always helps. The longer it goes, you just wonder, Boston Scott, who has theoretically the highest salary and therefore almost seemingly a spot on this team, you wonder, do you really need Boston Scott when you've only got room for 4 running backs and you already have 5 or 6?
Well, I guess the retort to that would be, if somebody gets hurt, you know that Scott knows what he's doing and that he has produced.
You do. I feel like that's maybe not the best reason to keep a guy like Boston Scott over Rashad Penny, to your question, or Trey Sermon, or anybody else, Kenny Gainwell, DeAndre Swift. So this still has to work itself out. Everybody still has, I mean, there's still good 2 to 3 weeks here before they play a game. So that's a lot of competition, a lot of reps for everyone, and requires everybody to stay healthy. You have not seen very much of an explosive Rashad Penny this camp. It just doesn't mean it. Listen, sometimes camp is passing camp more than running camp anyway. I don't want to take anything away from him. If the game started today, I would think that Kenneth Gainwell and Rashad Penny are kind of your first, second down running backs. DeAndre Swift comes in as your pass catching running back, your third down running back, your screen back. And I don't, see what kind of role you would have right now for Trey Sermon or even Boston Scott, other than one of those guys as a backup.
Yeah, I guess, do you keep 4 guys on the active roster on game day too? Because I would imagine Swift and Gainwell, and let's say you kept Penny, are you going to activate 4 on game day?
If one of them is your kick returner, yes, you can do that. That's where Boston Scott comes in. So could it be Boston Scott, Gainwell, Penny, and DeAndre Swift? Certainly could be. And that would leave Trey Sermon as the odd man out.
Okay. Geoff Mosher, Football at 4, Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. We got some listener questions that we'll get to coming up for Geoff here in a second. I want to go over.
But wait, real quick.
Yep.
I just want to accentuate this point, though. We know what Boston Scott is. We know he's been valuable. The idea of keeping Boston Scott because he can return kicks over a guy like Trey Sermon, who may have a much greater upside as a third-year player who was a second-round pick, I believe, or a third-round pick of the Niners. And, whatever issues plagued him in San Francisco, they have not been here. The coaches have loved him. You've heard them speak about him as a practice player. Listen, it's a small thing. I'm not being critical. I'm just saying it's almost mind-boggling to me that you would keep Boston Scott, right, because he's Mr. Reliable, over a guy who may have some really, really good potential in Trey Sermon. However, all that being said, running backs are fungible, and it wouldn't surprise me if whoever the Eagles got rid of, they were able to just bring right back to the practice squad.
Yeah, that's an interesting point there. Now, on the offensive side of the ball, we look at the line, you look at that running back room, and then obviously everything else seemingly is pretty set on board. Not the case on the defensive side of the ball. Let's start. Here's an interesting question from a listener who said for Geoff Mosher, how about who's the best linebacker in coverage? He says, the linebacker liability can't help me think about the 2019-23 seasons with tight ends torching the Eagles over and over again over the middle. What do you think about that? Do they have a coverage problem at the linebacker position?
They might. I mean, I think the sample size on Nakobe Dean is not big enough, and I never try to draw long-term conclusions from what you see in camp. But it's a good question. It's a subject that on tomorrow's Inside the Birds podcast, you're going to hear Adam and I talk quite a bit about, because the Eagles may be doing things in camp right now that sort of give their hand away about what kind of they want to be formationally on defense when it's time to stop the pass. You have probably heard or seen James Bradbury working on the inside. We know Josh Jobe has really developed nicely on the outside. I have talked with you, I think, before about the idea that you might want to see more dime from this defense going forward. Like, you get your four-man rush, you get your one linebacker in Nakobe Dean, but what you're really doing, playing a lot of zone and using more defensive backs to help you with that issue of coverage, right? And maybe Bradbury and Maddox are interior cover guys in a dime look with Jobe and Slay on the outside, and then your safeties being Reed Blankenship and, say, Sidney Brown for these kind of packages. So it would not surprise me, because to answer your question, I don't know that they really are. Certainly the two guys they brought in, Zach Cunningham and Miles Jack, are not going to be out there. You don't want them out there in pass coverage. I think Christian Ellis has developed nicely, but I still don't know that you're ready to say, hey, let's just be in two linebacker nickel a whole lot and have Christian Ellis and Nakobe Dean chasing tight ends. I think their best formation or best personnel grouping might be having 6 defensive backs on the field.
Yeah, and it's interesting because let's go to the defensive backs. Put more on. Who are they going to be? It sounds pretty clear that Reed Blankenship is cemented himself as the starting safety here. So much so, Geoff, do you think that they would even look outside the organization for safety help now?
It's always possible. I would urge people to not get tricked into thinking somebody's running with the first team. That must mean they're locked. If you go back to last year, Anthony Harris was a first team safety for the Eagles because he was the incumbent. It was year 2. He knew the defense right. He was the first team safety all throughout camp until all of a sudden he wasn't an Eagle anymore. And I would just caution with Kevon Wallace, I'm not saying he's not better. I'm not saying he hasn't developed. He probably has. But in general, the league and the Eagles have viewed him as a limited type of player who can help you in the box, but not as much in coverage. And unless all of a sudden he's worlds better than that, and I would probably doubt that, I would say you're may be considered a limited safety in that he's a better box safety than a coverage safety, but he's better than Kevon Wallace. I mean, he's played 5 years on a pretty good Steelers defense, right? So you would imagine he would get a nod over Kevon Wallace. And then Sidney Brown obviously is now trying to fight to get more time in some sub packages, if not starting.
Yeah, Sidney Brown, I thought good. Obviously, showed a lot of closing speed the other night. We'll see if the Eagles, I guess they're trying to figure out how to, slow him down a little. I mean, yeah, you want him to close and make those plays, but it's almost like one of these guys that plays like his hair's on fire all the time. He doesn't have another gear. He just constantly in the highest gear.
It's funny that you said that. I had a conversation with someone, and I said, who was telling me how much they've been impressed by Sidney Brown, a team person. And I said, that's great. It's obvious. He's got the motor, the pursuit, the closing speed. And then I joked, I remember saying that about Ernie Sims, right? And it was like, come on, this is not the same situation. Ernie Sims, if you remember when they brought him in, was so fast and so athletic that he would wind up running himself out of place or being completely faked out on a screen because he was just over pursuing. Sidney Brown, as you just said, will have to learn to play within himself. He is probably going to miss a tackle every once in a while because of that. He did that in college. He is every once in a while going to probably drive a coach crazy because he's so juiced up, Mike, that, it's hard to play within yourself when you're doing that, especially as you're learning to acclimate to a new defense. But there's no question that when you're watching the Eagles play and you're comparing Sidney Brown to everybody else they got at safety, you see the juice, man. I mean, you see that closing speed, you see that pursuit, you see that hunger. That's good stuff. That's hard to keep off a field, and you're willing to live with the growing pains when you see the upside there.
Moshe, we got some interesting decisions that the Eagles are going to have to make roster-wise, some talented guys. Are there any surprise cuts that you foresee coming?
I don't know if I would say surprise cuts, Mike. I would say surprise moves, because the Eagles have these moves every year, right? But let's look at the interior defensive line. Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, who has been an absolute stud so far, right? We know they're on the team. Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter. Fletcher Cox. That's three guys right there who are pretty entrenched in what they are. But you also have Milton Williams. It's year 3 now. They got to decide, are we going to extend this guy? Is he just a backup for 2 more years, then he walks, which they've done with some other guys, or just a role player for 2 years, then he walks, right? But he's going to have to get some playing time because he's good. I mean, he's got good burst, right? They signed Kentavious Street. Moro Ajomo has had a nice camp. Marlon Tuipulotu. I mean, the team needs a backup run stuffer, because if Jordan Davis gets hurt, it puts him at square one, like last year when Jordan Davis wasn't ready. They had to go to the streets to get Linval Joseph, right? So I just named for you 7 defensive tackles, and all of them are pretty good. And you can make an argument for all of them having a role, but you cannot keep 7 defensive tackles, especially, Mike, when you're talking about being in a 4-man rush situation, right? That's what you want to be, strong on first down and then get into your nickel and your sub packages. I don't even know what your 4-man rush interior looks like. Usually that's Fletcher Cox and Javon Hargrave. Well, Hargrave's gone. Now you got Cox. Carter is showing he can rush the passer. You can move BG inside because he's rushed the passer. You got to find a place for Brandon Graham. He's on the team, right? Cox, that's 4 guys I just mentioned, usually for 2 spots on the inside. So they have a logjam. They have a good situation, and I'm not going to even – I don't know what the answer is, but I'm just saying if there was a move that really shocked people, it might be among the interior defensive line where they just can't keep everyone.
Mm-hmm. All right. You anticipate both Myles Jack and Zach Cunningham making the team?
It's possible that they could. I would more anticipate one of them making the team. I would, we'll have to see. I think that those are some unanswered questions because they just got here. Basically, we got to see them in the preseason game tomorrow night, see how the next few weeks go. I was told Zach Cunningham was a guy to really keep an eye on because he's a tackling machine. Myles Jack came with a lot of questions about how much he had left in the knees. Great guy, great teammate, great leader. The Steelers loved everything about him last year, except that they were just worried. They obviously didn't bring him back, right? They were worried that he had come to the end of the line from what he had left in his knees, whereas Zach Cunningham had some weird elbow injury last year, but it's not like there's any questions about his knees as much as maybe Myles Jack. And so with linebackers, you're talking about basically someone who can help you out on first down, stopping the run, short yardage, goal line. Zach Cunningham was a tackling machine for most of his career, and if he's healthy, I think that would give him – plus his 6'3", Mike. 6'3", and he has really long arms. Like for an Eagles linebacker to be 6'3", do you know what that must look like in the classroom? Most of their linebackers are 5'11" and 6 feet. They must be like staring upward at this guy. Like, you look like a tree,
right? Exactly.
For an Eagles linebacker.
Yeah.
So
somebody texted in about
those traits. Give him away.
Somebody texted in about Cunningham saying, "Is he the answer? Led the league in tackles in 2020. Got suspended a couple times. He's been hurt a bunch. Can he be the answer at that position?" I think the Eagles. I would imagine the Eagles hope so.
Zach Cunningham.
Yes.
I mean, when we talk about the answer, though, this is in my estimation, from what I see, right, the Eagles don't want to have 2 inside linebackers on the field a whole lot, right? I mean, I think that they want to be a nickel and dime, and in their nickel, it might be a big nickel with more safeties than linebackers. 3 safeties, 3 corners, 1 linebacker, that's 7, right, and your 4-man rush. So Zach Cunningham is – what we're talking about is the answer for a very specialized first down, run down player. After that, it's Nakobe Dean, and I'm not sure there's anybody else that you'd want on the field from the linebacker crew. Although I will say the team has been pleased with Christian Ellis's development They do like it, but again, we're talking about winning NFL games here. I don't know if Christian Ellis is, at the end of the day, a savior.
All right, Geoff, tomorrow night, a couple things. I know there's no starters playing. There are a couple things that you will be keeping an eye on if you're getting ready for Inside the Birds podcast the next day. What are some of the things you think you guys will be discussing after tomorrow night?
Well, obviously, these wide receivers are going to get more, with Quez Watkins and Britton Covey out. You're probably going to see more of Joseph Ngata and more of Tyree Cleveland, who have been impressive. Now, I don't know how either of them really can make this team unless they keep like 6, which is hard to believe because they've got their top 4 set. A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Quez, and Olamide Zaccheaus, right? So your 5th guy should be a guy who returns punts. Otherwise, what is he doing on your 53? You're not going to use your 5th wide receiver unless there's 2 injuries. So, but still, Cleveland's had a nice camp. Joseph Ngata, undrafted kid, turned some eyes, and they'll get some opportunities. Look forward to seeing that. The offensive line, of course. Josh Sills, Mike, got cleared legally. He literally came to practice, right, the night before the open practice, did his testing, whatever, physical. Then the next day, he's like in pads at the open practice. Then like 2 days later, he's playing in a preseason game. I think he played in it. And now he's like in joint practices as your second string left guard with Landon Dickerson limping off. They really need to figure out what their depth is on the left side of the line. And I'll be interested to see how much Josh Sills can play and what he does. And if you're not interested in seeing Sidney Brown for a second time, then you must not be an Eagles fan because after that first game, Mike, I don't know if you saw, he was the leading tackler among all safeties as far as tackle percentage in the preseason after week 1.
Well, obviously, everybody likes to see the young guys excel. We'll be keeping an eye on him. Jalen Carter, will he play? Because I'd like to watch more of him.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think he'll get some reps in there. And Moro Ojomo, don't lose sight of him. He's a 7th-round pick. A lot of personnel people around the league told me that they didn't think he would make it to the 7th round. They thought he was the best interior rusher at Texas. And that he had some juice to him. And we've seen that so far in camp, and he should get plenty of reps too. So keep an eye on him.
And he pushed the pile on Saturday night. He was obviously making some impact. Not statistically speaking, but you could see him pushing line back into the backfield. And those are the type of things that those interior guys you look for is can they create bunches in the backfield to blow up passing games, run games, all sorts of stuff. All right, tomorrow night you can hear the game right here on 97.3 ESPN. That is Football at 4. He is Geoff Mosher. He'll be back for a Mosher Monday next week here on the Sports Bash. Thank you, Geoff.
You got it, Mike.